Hello out there, you sauce minxes. We are back once again with the wonderful Adrian Tchaikovsky, and this time we're going to ask him some questions, and there's nowhere to go but up, Adrian. So, who inspired you to start telling your own stories?
Well, so as I mentioned in the intro to the previous one, I started off through gaming, and so my early stories are gaming stories, and so that it comes entirely out of a non-fiction writing direction. What transferred that into actually writing prose for an audience was, weirdly enough, my discovery of the Dragonlance books by Weiss and Hickman.
Okay.
Because they were basically someone's write-up of a D&D campaign.
Yeah.
And that was just this light bulb moment of, oh, there's a path from where I am now to where they are writing books about these sort of fantasy adventures. And that's something I could conceivably do. And prior to that, it had never even occurred to me. And it was a long road. I spent like 15 years writing stuff and getting it rejected. But that was still the what set me on the path at the start.
I like that, this idea of the campaign write-ups. Did you then start doing some write-ups of your own? Is that sort of where
No, I was very much just sort of kind of cutting out the middleman and just creating the stories without actually having the inconvenience of players getting in the way. But it was very much that idea of, these sort of fantasy adventures that I'm thinking up as a games master. I can transfer those to the page.
Yeah, I think Nico and I both do quite a lot of GMing, as it's called, and I think there's definitely a stage when you're in the process of prepping a session or a one shot or a campaign. Where you're like, I should probably just be writing this as a novel or something. Like this is.
I definitely get the odd. Every so often you go, "Oh, that'd be a great idea for a session." Actually, that idea might be too good for a session. I'm going to put that one in my notebook.
Oh, but I think it's not a finite pool, is it, of ideas? I think it's the harder you plumb the depths, the bigger the ideas that you dredge up, I think. But I don't know. It would be vaguely terrifying to run out of stories, wouldn't it? I feel like that's considering we do write pretty frequently. I don't know whether that's.
I mean, I've got into the good practice of noting down ideas as they come to me, and honestly, I suspect I have enough ideas just in the folder to last me till the end of my life.
Fantastic, yeah. I can't remember who it was. It may have been Stephen King or something like that. But they once said that I don't think it was Stephen King. So just preface this. But it was somebody famous. I'll have to look it up afterwards. But they said that if the idea is good enough, you don't have to write it down. It'll stick with you. And I just thought, fuck that. What are you talking about? Write that, get it out of your head so you can get on with your day. Because I found that. Yeah,
I would probably have agreed with that when I was 20.
Yeah.
Now I am over 50, and one forgets things. And I have absolutely thought up fantastic ideas that I haven't written down, and then only remembered later that I had a fantastic idea, but not what it was. So I feel that one can absolutely forget phenomenal ideas, or indeed remember terrible ones. So
So I on occasion write down the ingredients for a dish I've cooked my entire life when I go to the supermarket. I think you write things down. It's fine.
What goes in the sofrito again? I know it's 3 things.
I don't have a great, as far as writing culture goes, I don't have a great deal of patience with people who try to over mystify it and make it out like it's some kind of grand sort of sublime experience, because I mean, that's completely useless to anyone trying to learn writing. But B, and it's weirdly, it's exclusive, because you kind of think, oh, what? I mean, I guess I don't get sort of magical ideas gifted to me by angels in my dreams. I can't be a writer then. And that's not like this. Everyone has their own path to it, and it's just.
It's actually quite similar to the outlook of the pal in your story, isn't it? In the last episode, where they were like, these people are just less than perfect. That's sort of what what that myth is propagating, isn't it? This idea that
I mean, an awful lot of my work, especially my fantasy work, I'm trying to push back against this very, very entrenched fantasy fiction concept that only certain people are allowed to be heroes. You either you have to have the magic gift, or you have to be of the royal bloodline, or something prophecy something. But it's just they are. I mean, especially with the stuff I'm writing at the moment, the people who are the main characters are generally completely random and very normal people, and this is what they do, and it is the the chance circumstances they find themselves in, which are the important things.
I think that actually leads us pretty perfectly on to the next question, which is, so when you're reading fiction, what themes do you find particularly appealing?
I very much like the idea of deep time in fantasy and sci-fi. I like the idea of the big ancient wonders and mysteries, the lost civilizations, the kind of the previous cycles of life and culture that have risen and fallen, and now we're discovering the ruins. And it's there's nothing particularly unique in that. It's a very common concept, but just the idea of once you build that into a setting, it gives that setting an extra dimension that that some fantasy worlds or sci-fi worlds don't generally have. Just the idea that these stories have been going on since long before this book happened.
Yeah,
I think an interesting thing you can do with that as well, like a lot of people, you're writing a world, and you say, oh, I want some history for this world, so I better write a huge, extensive pile of lore for it. But just think about, in our real world, we have this belief that there's a lost city called Atlantis that's underwater somewhere. And that is the some knowledge we have about the lost city of Atlantis, that it's lost and it's underwater somewhere. You can just make vague suggestions towards
you can.
something.
I mean, I will hold up my hand and say I'm very much the write a pile of lore sort of writer. The key thing is then resisting the temptation to put the pile of lore in the book. But I find knowing the pile of lore then informs everything you write, so that it all holds together. Very coherently. It all comes from the same place, and you can throw in these intriguing little snippets of stuff that actually does have detail if you should want to later come back to it and explore it. And having said that, though, actually, one of the interesting thing taking up Atlantis. I mean, the thing is, all right, Atlantis comes from some Greek writings. It's being used as an allegory. It's never intended to be a real place. People then took it and run with it, and kind of. One of the things that a lot of fantasy fiction is surprisingly barren of is fiction. If there is a myth and a legend and a prophecy and so forth, it always, well, not always, it very frequently turns out to be literally absolutely true and relevant to what is specifically happening now. And I think one of the things people to bring to this sort of writing is the idea, well, everything has got to serve the story. And my position on this is actually no. It's very, very useful to have stuff that's just in the world, because building the world is a goal in itself. But because if you have a world that feels real, and feels as though people live in it, that just makes everything much more immersive, and it gives a better reading experience. But that also means you can have stuff that doesn't directly impact on the plot just turning up in the background and being a part of the lives of those characters as stuff is, and it doesn't all have to be about the demon army that is about to be unleashed across the world. You can have you can have a myth about the demon army which turns out to be complete bunkum. It's just a thing that people believe.
I like that a lot. I think I'm just trying to think of some examples of where that's been executed well. And I know it's a bit trite to keep bringing things back to Lord of the Rings, isn't it? But obviously the songs are deployed quite well in Lord of the Rings. I think you get sort of Bilbo singing these various anthems and all the rest of it, and they don't often tie back in, but they often they're the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's effectively secondary media within a secondary world.
Yes. Secondary media, that's the
but then again, I mean, a lot of the stuff in Lord of the Rings, like a lot of the elven stuff, that is literally people singing about things that literally happened. And I guess with the elves, literally happened to people they know because they're thousands of years old. So you get this, I mean, in a way, you've almost got an excuse with Tolkien as to why an awful lot of it is literally true, because the people are all still around. But yes, I mean,
Yeah.
just having stuff, the idea of people in a fictional world making up purely fictional stuff is always a lot of fun, and it can still link to the themes. I mean, there is, in the middle of the Book of the New Sun, there is not an entire play. There are snippets of a play that gets performed.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely fascinating, because from a certain point of view, this stuff is actually genuinely relevant, and it is literally telling you what is going to happen in the wider book in a very, very veiled way. At the same time, Wolfe is writing it with the thought of, this is a play that people are performing. There is stagecraft going on. People need to change costumes, and just there is there's a lot of kind of theatrical humor just worked into the fact that this thing exists in that world as a performance piece, which has to work as a performance piece as well as serving the plot of the book.
I like that, because it would
That
be quite embarrassing, wouldn't it, to write a play that just anybody reading it would be like, that would be awful, and but to tell it po-faced and be like, yeah, this is high art in this setting. Well, I think I just lost respect for all of the characters in this setting.
I think that's actually quite. I might have to have that at some point. That we have achieved the pinnacle of our art form.
Yeah.
We call it the soap opera. So
I mean, it's one of those things. It's something that happens in the Nine Fox Gambit, Yoon-Ha Lee. There is an ongoing just kind of theme of the main character really, really likes trashy romantic dramas.
Yeah.
And you get weirdly, you get a lot of detail about how the world works just through them describing the plots of these dramas. Because once you know what people like in the way of entertainment, that's actually a huge piece of sort of cultural character building.
Yeah, I think we're sort of obviously we're talking about secondary media, but it all does tie into verisimilitude, doesn't it? This idea of trying to construct a living, breathing world, and that's often done through, like, I don't know, like patterns of speech. Sometimes, like, you think about like Game of Thrones with things like, calling people like Sir, SER, and sort of like high romance speech. And then I've encountered stuff before. It's to do with the way that the characters swear. So I think is it the Expanse books, they have a fairly like extensive vulgar vocabulary through it that you find that you start like adopting it halfway through, because it works. Like, it does actually work.
It's one of the most difficult things to do, is inventing slang and expletive and things like that in such a way that they sound plausible to the reader, and they come across as actually something that has arisen organically within the world. Because most of the time when you do it, it is patently, you have invented a nonsense world because you don't want to use, insert real expletive here, and it always sounds laughable. And then every so often someone will pull it off, and I mean, as a writer, you see that you just give them a little quiet nod of, well done, that is a thing that I cannot usually do.
Yeah.
Tell you who does do that very well. I think Joe Abercrombie does that quite well. I think he at one point repeatedly refers to testicles as fruits.
Yes.
To sort of get him in the fruits and stuff like that. And it's just that I can imagine that being used on schoolyards,
Yes, and you can absolutely see how that would arise. And in fact, it's exactly within the fruits or stones or something like that. There are plenty of real words across the world where that's the etymological derivation. In fact, I have a feeling that.
Go
on. This may be me completely screwing my etymology. I have a vague feeling that the word testicles might even come from stones. Ooh. as etymology. So
maybe it wasn't as big a leap as I'm making out there, but it definitely works. It as there's a sort of internal.
Yeah, because I mean, fruits works perfectly well, and you can instantly see how people would come to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to pull it back to your books just for a mo, and then we will allow you to.
Oh no, it doesn't.
You like again afterwards.
Sorry, I'm just, because etymology is a great. How
I love looking stuff up like that. It's so good.
To testify.
Oh, as in, like, you can swear on your balls, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I think that is So there we go. It's just to correct the record there.
We shall hereby call them the truth fruits. So speaking of bodies of work, as it
Oh, solid
were,
segue.
where would you recommend that people start reading yours? And other than everywhere, where is the place you would recommend they can buy it?
Well, this really depends on what people like. And I mean, when people ask me to recommend, I always ask, well, what sort of books do you go for? I mean, for my money, my best work is this current fantasy series, which the first book of which is City of Last Chances. But like I say, you can kind of dive in anywhere. I am better known as a science fiction author, though. I mean, as far as the science fiction goes, my best known work is Children of Time, which is kind of like big, large scale, hard sci-fi evolution, spiders, that sort of thing. If you like something that's more actiony and a bit looser, then the Final Architecture series is my space opera series. Possibly my finest sci-fi, by my own reckoning, is Dogs of War, which is not one of the better known ones. So, I mean, all of these places, or I've got a whole raft of novellas now where people like shorter stuff. I mean, Firewalkers is one I'm particularly fond of, which is sort of a quite a wild sort of climate sci-fi book that's been out a while. Elder Race is another one that people seem to really like, which is both a science fiction novel and a fantasy novel in the same book.
It's really impressive to have achieved so much over so many genres and subgenres.
Yeah.
I think. Is there something sort of internal to you that requires you to branch out?
I really, really like to just be able to move around within the genre. I mean, I suspect I'm never going to write stuff that isn't sci-fi or fantasy in some form.
Yeah.
But the fact that I've currently got the freedom to write hard sci-fi and sort of action sci-fi and a variety of different levels of fantasy and all of that sort of thing it just basically means that all of the ideas I get, I know I can find some sort of use for.
Yeah.
I think one of the beautiful things about sci-fi and fantasy is that you could kind of have like a great big sketch pad labeled sci-fi, and once you open it, it's up to you what media you start working in, isn't it? Like your watercolor sci-fi could be completely different to your pastels sci-fi, and they still fit in that same bubble, for lack of a better term. So, yeah, I think you've got two genre there, especially now we know that you cross them over, that have so much scope, especially for someone with an imagination like yours. So you're in the right zone, I think.
Yeah, it's quite a good space to interrogate ideas from the real world as well, isn't it? You know, in fiction and fantasy, it's a good space to do that. Do you ever fear? I know I've encountered. I'm not saying yours is like this at all, but I have encountered SF writers that their work becomes quite didactic. It's very sort of telling you all the wrongs in the world. Is that something that you're sort of aware of in the industry as well, or is that
I think I'm aware that there's very much a danger that I'm going to get there, and I've had to. And the thing is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a message in your work, but if you get to the point of using the book like a soapbox to push your particular hobby horse, I think it then just becomes a much less interesting read.
Yeah.
So I'm aware of having to steer myself away when I feel strongly about things, and sometimes, I mean, I will frequently play devil's advocate. For example, I mean, I myself am basically a sort of a thoroughly non-religious rationalist. And so in my fantasy work at the moment, rather than saying, right, I will have the evil cult with the evil god, I would say, no, I'm going to make an empire of evil atheists who basically render down gods for magic.
Oh, we were actually talking about rationalism in one of the previous episodes of this season, which was quite actually. I think I was citing Frank Herbert again, as opposed to Tolkien being more of a binary of good versus evil. He's sort of more like the ends can be evaluated separate to the means. I'm just also very aware that you have, and I feel like we would do our listeners a disservice by not asking this question, but you have won what would be described as a metric shit ton of awards. Does that ever get old for you? Because we recently won our first award and we were absolutely blown away by it. you opened with the Arthur C. Clarke Award, which was just enormous. At least that's what I'm aware of, anyway.
Yes, I mean that was also absolutely transformative in that I went from being a very modestly successful fantasy author to an extremely successful science fiction author just during the period from the shortlisting to the win.
Right.
And it has literally made me as an author and allowed me to go full time and all that sort of thing. So it's had an enormous impact, positive impact on me. And it's, I mean, as a lot of authors will say, you don't ever get out of the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And so having the fact that, you know, every so often you will get this sort of situation where, yes, a bunch of people have liked your work enough to say, we would like you to have this thing. That actually doesn't get old, because you never, you never lose the idea that, oh God, am I still any good? Is this latest book rubbish? Are people suddenly going to realize they've been conned and are going to turn around and say, why are you pretending to be a writer? And you don't get rid of that, honestly. So that kind of recognition genuinely does work, just even if it's purely as a psychological kind of boon.
Oh yeah, that we can definitely understand that, but I think obviously you're at a completely different level. But I think the sort of follow up there, and if you don't want to go into this is absolutely fine. But you had the Truth Fruits to be able to give an award back that you were offered as well.
Yes, I mean, yes, because looking at the way that the administration of the award had gone, I didn't feel that I could reasonably claim to have necessarily been on the shortlist, let alone win it. And so, and this for people who don't, this is the 2023 Hugos, where there was a lot of malarkey. And I mean, honestly, I will also absolutely say that I am extremely privileged to be in a position where I can have something like that and say, well, fine, I will give it back, because I am established enough that it's not going to dent my position. So I am, it is a bit of a dilettante thing to have done.
I don't know whether dilettante's the right word there. I mean, not to correct your vocabulary there, but it's actually, I think it's quite important, isn't it? Because you took a stand with something that mattered for everybody else as well. It wasn't just like you were just waving it away. It's like
but also I mean, very much I was in a position career-wise, where I could take that stand and know that it wasn't going to have any real comeback on me. And therefore, so I think it is not as dramatic as it sounds to have done so, but I also felt at the time that it was the only reasonable thing for me to do under the circumstances.
Power to you. I feel like I made that a bit heavy. So Nico, go on. Hit us with your favorite question.
Adrian, Bubby, Bubbler, meine Liebling.
Okay.
Say, hypothetically, that there were two writer podcasters and they were being held at one point by a powerful and capricious bibliomancer. And that bibliomancer was still hypothetical, of course. He was hell-bent on filling a magic library with the best novels and anthologies he could. What would you recommend to that wizard so that he doesn't blow my head off? Hypothetically, mine and Ben's heads off.
Am I allowed to ask the wizard what sort of books he likes?
No, you may ask me nothing.
I would say, I would recommend a book called The Folk of the Air by Peter Beagle, which has been out of print for most of my life and is almost impossible to get hold of. So hopefully you can magic up a copy. But it is one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. It's one of the few books I have reread on multiple times. I would recommend Sword of Bronze and Ashes by Anna Smith Spark, which was just, I think, last year, and is again amazingly written, because she has a prose style that no one else comes close to. I would probably recommend Neuromancer, which remains an absolute stone cold classic of the science fiction genre. And weirdly, after a period of feeling like it was almost an alternate past, feels like it's now becoming more relevant again, which
Yeah.
is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because
I,
all the tech works through like sort of tape decks and things like that, doesn't it? But then,
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. The world around it has actually becoming more and more
yeah.
recognizable.
So I mean, there are three.
I think those are good. I mean, with the first one, the one by Beagle, the what about that writing captured you? Do you think?
So one of the things we don't have that many of in the sci-fi and fantasy genre is genuinely lyrical poetic writers. And all of Peter Beagle's stuff is extremely beautiful, but in that particular book, there are various turns of phrase he has, and it's very weird. It's very weird because it's an urban fantasy story about 20 years before urban fantasy was really a thing. And if it had come out at another time, and there are a number of writers like this, you kind of feel they missed their slot. And if they brought their book out a bit later on, they would have been extremely celebrated for it. But it had kind of been and gone before the audience was ready for it. And it's a book about magic in the modern day, and it's about myth, and it's about LARPing, weirdly enough. Again, before LARPing was in any way in the public consciousness, he's talking about like he's got a version of the Society of Creative Anachronism, which he, as an individual, was involved in. And there is just such an amazing beauty in the way people are described. He does a very good line in animal analogies when he's describing characters. There's one character who's described as mantis graceful and mannerly as death, which is just such an incredible line, and the book is full of stuff like that.
Yeah, I got the shadow of that just from you saying it, and that was good. Oh, yeah. There's a rhythm to that. There's the bounce to that, isn't there? It's just undeniable.
Yeah, I mean, he has always been. I mean, and his best known book is The Last Unicorn, and that is also exquisitely beautifully written. But he's always been one of the absolute masters of the English language working in genre. And like I say, there's not that many. I mean, I am trying to get more so, but I am not, I think, the most lyrical writer by any means. But I mean, again, Anna Smith Sparks is another writer who does it. And with her, it's more like she's kind of doing almost like full on Homeric epic sort of stuff a lot of the time. But that particular book, Sword of Bronze and Ashes, she has a variety of different modes and styles which all interweave beautifully within the one narrative, and it's quite incredible how she does it.
I'm a big fan of her work. Anna Smith Spark is very good, and I like grimdark, and I think she's probably at the apex of that subgenre, really, isn't she? I remember reading the Court of Broken Knives a long time ago, and just almost having to I did sort of double take, that sort of like cartoonish waggling of the face, and then I had to restart the first chapter because I realized that I couldn't just, in this sort of like brain dead, just consuming more and more fantasy literature way, just plow through it. I actually had to switch on and engage with it, and I really liked it, and I would recommend that to people as well. But yeah, very good. I believe she is coming on the podcast actually. So
awesome!
If people are interested, they will be able to listen to her episode as well as yours.
She's an extremely good reader.
Yes, yeah. Well, when we were at FantasyCon in Chester, I was equally blown away by her at on the panels as I was by you. It was really quite I think probably profound is maybe taking it a touch far, but I really enjoyed being in that space, hearing people who really cared about the art that they were making, discussing it and vaguely, and giving a bit of a sort of debate between each other.
Yeah.
It really worked for me. I know you've done a lot of panels and a lot of cons this year. Did you find that you'd run out of fucks to give by the end, or were you still as
I mean, not that, because I mean each con has its own kind of feel. So although occasionally you sit and thinking, well, I've done this panel like 9 times in the last 3 years, and maybe I ought to start saying no to it. But in general, there's always some sort of new twist, and you know, there's a new thing you've not done that turns up. So I got to be the most recent panel convention I did, which was Utopia Isles in France. I got to do a panel on the work of Ian Banks, for example, which was a lovely thing to be able to kind of give kudos where it's due. And I'd not been on that topic before. I mean, I've got to say, I've done enough this year that it has started to wear me down somewhat, but it is now all done, and next year's looking a lot clearer, so I'll be able to recharge the batteries.
Well, I think we probably adequately stated that bibliomancer. He probably won't hypothetically murder us.
He has put the wand back in his hypothetical pocket, so I think I'm safe.
The execution has stayed. So when you, as we know that you're very prolific, when you have written a first draft, what is your editing process after that point?
So, part of how I manage to get as much done as I do is that before I start writing, I do a lot of work on the world, and then the draft I write is very cohesive. Everything is coming from the same point. Everything is interlinking to each other, so that my first draft and my submission are very similar if I have done my job right. That being said, I will do a full reading pass and tighten it up, because I do tend to write long and just go off on stuff that doesn't need to be in the book, and just kind of adjust any little things that I don't want to put my editors to the trouble of picking up. But usually it is just, I will have one read through, and then I'll send it off to my agent, and they may have comments or they may be happy with it.
So when you do the work on the world, do you write a companion document for the series? Do you write the companion document on the series level rather than the novel level?
It will vary. I mean, usually I'll write it on the first novel, and then the second novel will get that and a bunch of extra stuff added to it and so forth, because usually I when I'm writing multiple books in a setting, I will move around place to place. So for example, I'm about to start writing probably beginning of next year the fourth book in the Tyrant Philosophers series, this fantasy series. So I've got all the previous stuff, some of which I've imported, but also, right, we're going to a new place. What's this place like? Who are what's the culture? Who are the factions? What are the peculiarities? Who are the main characters going to be? That kind of thing.
Do you think that's a holdover from your role play then? You know, being ready for a player to say, well, hang on, what's the economic stimulation like in this area?
Well, I think that's one reason it works well as book design, because it means you over detail.
Yeah.
Which then means you have a wealth of stuff to put into the book, and you have a wealth of sort of foundation under you that you can build up from. Particularly with these fantasy books, is normally historically I've plotted fairly carefully. But with this series, what I'm doing is I am creating the world and the characters, and then I'm just following them around and writing down what they do. And so I don't know how the books will actually turn out, but I do set up those sort of initial pressures and sort of friction points that will then drive the engine of the book.
That sounds quite almost like you've reached a stage of like flourishing with it. Is that like, as in,
It's been fascinating, because it was a bit terrifying, because writing a book where I didn't know how it was going to end, or indeed whether it would end, or whether it would just be still going after sort of 500,000 words or something ridiculous like that. But there's obviously some sort of subconscious level of guidance going on that's brought it all to a satisfactory close, and I've been able to keep hold of all the various threads, and future chapters will keep suggesting themselves like sort of stepping stones, just turning up when you need to walk on them.
Yeah.
So I think it's certainly it's been a quite a fun experiment to to work with. And I mean, that's a new thing I can do. So after this series, I'll probably deploy that in other worlds as well.
Another arrow in your quiver. It's very good.
I'll have to have you back on in a couple of years and see. So I've actually discovered a new thing where I psychically link myself to a nest of ants, and they provide me with plot ideas.
You you mentioned in the previous episode that this latest series, the Tyrant Philosophers, each of them is standalone, and you can just pick them up and at any point in the series.
Yeah.
Do you have different? Does that mean that you have to have different beta readers each time?
Yes, I need to find someone who hasn't read the previous one,
just
to make sure that this makes sense, and that the characters from the previous book aren't hogging too much of the limelight and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So they can be like, "Who's this guy? Why are you devoting pages to this guy?" Yeah, I like that. Oh, what an interesting process. It sounds like it's working. So nice one.
So, for yourself, Adrian, do you feel connected to any particular culture? And if you do, has that affected your writing?
Sorry, could you ask that again?
So, do you feel in yourself that you are connected to any particular culture? And if you are connected to a culture, has it affected your writing?
So on a I guess on a shallow level, there is a certain idea of I've always, I've been a role player since 12, and there is a role player culture, and there are sort of memes and tropes and so forth, and that is absolutely something I'm in conversation with. And there will be little jokes and Easter eggs in stuff I write that will reference that. There's also, I mean, I'm of Polish extraction, and Polish history has a wealth of, a wealth of things going terribly wrong, I guess, which is always useful material for fantasy writing. And there are certainly a few of my books which are very explicitly referencing sort of episodes in Polish history.
Yeah.
Polish medieval history is particularly interesting. I think it's just an absolute slobber knocker of an area of the world, and it seems like it was a really interesting place. Obviously,
but there's this fascinating period, the partition, basically, where Poland ceases to exist, and basically doesn't re-exist until after the First World War, and it's through several hundred years in relatively recent history, where the idea of Poland is all of Poland that there was. And there were there were constant attempts to kind of throw off what was basically a tripartite yoke of Austria, Prussia, and Russia, who would just split the country between them. And that's kind of fascinating, because it's almost, there are times when it seems that you have something which almost works as an ideal better when it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because I mean, one of the first things that Poland decided to do when it got its actual existence back was go to war with the Czechoslovakia for no particularly good reason, as far as I can work out.
Oh well, I feel like that you can potentially see your interest in that even in the story that you read for us in the previous episode. This idea of a different culture coming in and extinguishing the one that was there beforehand. I think that's.
Yes, and certainly, I mean, the Palestine in general, and especially the first book, The City of Last Chances, it's very much based about that kind of the 19th century European situation of ethnicities and empires, and the tension between them.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to fess up. I have not read the Tyrant Philosopher series now, but after your story, I'm actually going to have to go and read it. So thank you for adding to my reading pile.
If we're fessing, I literally ordered a book of yours on Amazon during this conversation. It's very impolite of me, but
no. Well, I mean, I'll take that.
Yeah, in terms of faux pas, I think that's probably an excusable one.
So yeah, if I got quiet for a bit, that was just me trying to remember my card details.
It's not like we're professional podcasters or anything. Don't worry, guys, we're okay.
No. They can't take that award back, can they?
Right, okay, so I think you can tell that we're both avid tabletop role players, and Nico does in fact do LARPing as well, so I think we've got
cool.
that in common too. But have you got a current favourite TTRPG system or setting?
Well, I'm actually just about to start off running a campaign of a game called Wild Sea.
Oh shit! Yeah, we did that the other week.
Yeah, I've absolutely fallen in love with that. The system is fun, but the world is just so just so mad, and just keeps getting madder the further you go through it.
I totally agree. Yeah, that's I believe the guy the person behind that is called Felix Isaac or Felix Isaac.
Yes, and he's actually. I mean, I don't know if this will be relevant when you go out, but I know he's got another game currently on Kickstarter at the moment called Pico, which is basically a game of being small insect adventurers, which obviously is also extremely dear to my heart.
Yeah, I think Nico, did you already back that? I think
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Awesome.
I'm also a fan of bugs. So
yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I remember opening the first time I looked through Wildsea, how many sort of insectoid things there were, and immediately falling in love with the Mothrin. And I think as far as a setting goes, having nature be your apocalypse is what a great concept to just let anything happen.
The trees said, "Fuck your shit,"
Yeah.
and became skyscrapers, destroying everything else. It's a very good starting point, isn't it? Ah, yes. So I know that's that would be probably what you'd call a more sort of modern style TTRPG, isn't it? You know, it's quite
I've actually
narrative-based.
I don't tend to be a fan of the old school role playing side of things.
Yeah.
I'm quite sort of deep character focused. I tend to like that kind of force in the dark, sort of heart spire powered by the apocalypse sort of corner of the genre a lot. Also, frankly, because they're frequently quite quick to pick up and read, whereas I as I get older, new rule systems can be a bit challenging to get my head around.
Yeah. And it does sound like you're just reading a list of games that we've played in the last 6 months, though. You do that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of fun with these games. And in fact, I think the one of the main writer of Spire and Heart is also coming on at some point, potentially in the new year. So,
what Grant Howard?
Grant Howard,
awesome.
yes. So we'll have to see how that goes. But we've had enormous fun with all those games and systems. There's definitely something to be said for all of those ones that allow the players to massively impact the way that the story swings.
Yeah.
I think rather than, as you say, the traditional ones that are just sort of it's a bit like a maths lesson, really, isn't it? Let's be honest. It can get quite grindy, figuring out your various modifiers and stuff.
I think that there's someone somewhere listened to an improv coach just once and spread it out.
Yeah.
Because overnight roleplay went from no but to yes and that's all it takes for everyone to feel like they're having a good time at a table. If everyone's idea matters, then
from my
it's
understanding,
wonderful.
that did actually start with Blades in the Dark, as far as I can tell. I don't know if anybody was doing it beforehand.
I would say Apocalypse World.
Apocalypse World, right? I'm not.
Yeah, because I think the Force in the Dark system feels like a development from the Powered by the Apocalypse sort of system.
Well, that sounds like that might be a fairly good recommendation for us to go and try that one out, Nico, next. So we'll have to give that one
you're on.
Anyway, thank you for that completely self-indulgent diversion into tabletop role-playing games. But it's lovely to meet a fellow RPGer. So, I think we already know what your next project is, don't we? That you're going to be putting out this novella next.
Oh Lord, well that's not next.
That's next. Come on, tell us about your next project then.
I mean, I think the next thing that's coming out will be a book called Shroud, which will be like end of first quarter next year in the UK, which is a standalone sci-fi, a bit like Alien Clay. It's a sort of a survival, a hard sci-fi survival on alien world story with a lot of weird alien stuff going on.
I'm into it. I think we should also remind people that the third book in the Tyrant Philosopher's Days of Shattered Faith, which is where we drew the prompt from for the last episode, is out now. So when this episode goes out, it will be out. So and as we've just heard, you can pick up book 3 and go from there if you want to. So definitely check that one out.
So if our lovely listeners wanted to know what you're up to, sort of day to day, I believe you said you're a Blue Sky person. Is that the best place for them to go to keep up to date with your news?
Yes, Blue Sky, or also just check on the website adriantchaikovsky.com, which is updated sort of semi-regularly with new stuff as and when things are announced.
Fantastic.
Right,
Well, Yeah.
I don't think we should keep him much longer, Ben, because from the sounds of it, Adrian's got to write 37 books before bedtime today.
It's the quality and the quantity that just boggles me.
It's just
man.
not fair, is it?
Yeah, it's very impressive.
Absolute bollocks. I'm not having it.
I think the only thing really left to do is just thank you for your time. Really enjoyed telling some stories with you in the last episode, and also hearing your outlook on various things in this second episode. So thank you again for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?